Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Our Strange Reality. Tonight's story takes place in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. And no, we're not talking about the Jersey Devil, we're talking about a portal into another dimension. The Pine Barrens of New Jersey are filled with deserted little towns, some dating as far back as 1700. Most of these abandoned towns you can still hike out to and explore, but not the town of Ong's Hat. While you could still find it on a map, it's not there. It was apparently wiped off the planet by the government. Or was it? According to legend, the town of Ong's Hat was named for an actual hat, owned by a man named Ong, which is apparently a common surname in colonial times. But this Ong in particular was famous for wooing women and wearing very fancy dress. So legend goes, he was at the local tavern, got into a little spiff with his girlfriend, and she stomped all over his fancy hat that he loved. So then Ong, in a drunken rage, took his fancy hat and he stomped on it more, and then threw it up into a tree, which then stayed there for decades apparently. So any people coming into town knew where they were because of Ong's hat hanging off the tree, hence the name Ong's Hat. Now, eventually all these towns died out. Industry moved elsewhere, and all these small little communities became abandoned. So now it's just woods and ruin. So the story goes that a man named Wally Fard, back in the experimental 60s days, traveled the world with a bunch of different spiritual cults. And when Wally returned to the States in 1978, he bought up a huge plot of this land in the Pine Barrens to start up his own freaky spiritual cult, as one does. So Wally and a bunch of homeless runaways built this community out in the middle of the woods in the Pine Barrens. Just a bunch of rickety old trailers and shacks that they put up with materials that they could find or steal. And they started doing, their freaky religious cult stuff. But then they started to add science experiments into that. See, Wally had a lot of different beliefs. He believed that people could heal their bodies using just their minds, basically tapping into that unused part of your brain to heal the rest of your body from any sort of illness or injury. So Wally starts publishing all of these fringe beliefs that he has, and it starts attracting fringe scientists who were ridiculed by their fellow colleagues and wanted a place to go and freely do their experiments, I guess, without ridicule from the rest of the scientific community. There is a reason we have peer-reviewed, but whatever. These people needed to go do their fringe science in a safe space. Now, eventually word got around to two Princeton scientists, Frank and Athelia Dobbs, who also had a lot of fringe scientific beliefs. So they decided to pack their things up, leave Princeton, and head out to this science cult in the middle of the Pine Barrens. So the Dobb twins were raised in Texas in a UFO worshipping cult founded by their father. So these twins were already prone to freaky radical science cults. This was right up their fringe belief alley. We're not saying that UFOs aren't real. They clearly are. We just had a whole congressional meeting about them. But the freaky religious cults of religions that grow around them, it just gives the whole UFO community a bad name. Don't drink the Kool-Aid, kids. Okay, so the Dobbs twins used to being at the outskirts of the mainstream. So when they arrive at the Pines, they set up a laboratory in some ramshackle shack, and they began to make discoveries that started to shake the whole little commune community. So the twins were working on something they called cognitive chaos, which honestly sounds kind of cool. And so they founded the Institute of Chaos Studies, which also sounds pretty cool. And within 3 years of going to the Pines and setting up their lab, the Dobbs twins came up with an invention that they called the Gate. So basically they would hook up people to this device, and using like mind-altering drugs and other weird things, they would manipulate people's brainwaves. Now eventually they came up with their final and biggest experiment. They hooked up one of the homeless runaways living in the commune to this device, and once he was hooked in, him and the device both disappeared, only to rematerialize just moments later. This person claimed that he had traveled to a different dimension. He was still in the Pine Barrens, but there were no humans there, basically claiming that he had gone to like a sister dimension, the dimension next door, where everything was the same except there were no humans. It kind of sounds nice. Now, during this same time, there was apparently a nuclear chemical spill coming from Fort Dix nearby. So the folks on the commune had to evacuate. But instead of leaving Ong's hats, they used their device to just flee to the other dimension where there were no people. Hence, no nuclear spill. Think smarter. Now, of course, being this close to military base, obviously this cult of interdimensional travelers caught the attention of the government. And this led to a violent confrontation. They apparently sent people in to destroy the commune and killed at least 7 of the members. The rest escaping to the other dimension where there are no people. Smart. Now, the only problem with this story is that it's not true. Ong's hat was one of the first internet hoaxes created in the 1990s. It was started by a man named Joseph Matheny, who eventually wrote a book describing the full history of Ong's hat and the cult and their interdimensional travels. But like all good conspiracies, there are people out there who believe that Matheny just claims that this is all a hoax because it would jeopardize his safety to continue to tell people that the time-traveling scientist hippies were traveling interdimensionally. This would freak people out. So he had to tell people it was a hoax, right? So it's still up for debate. Was Ong's hat real? Did dimension-hopping hippie scientist cultists actually find a way into the dimension next to ours? Probably not, but it's a good story. There is another freaky urban legend that comes out of the Ong's Hat area, which has missing 411 elements to it, which I know everyone freaking loves. This kind of fits in with it. So by the early 20th century, pretty much everyone was gone out of these towns, like we said, once industry moved away. However, there was an old Polish couple that remained in the town. It was just them and like 2 other people. And their name was Chininski. So one day, Mrs. Chininski decides to go take a walk in the woods. Guess what? She's never seen again. Of course, suspicion falls onto Mr. Chininski, as it usually does with married couples. So then Mr. Chininski goes and walks in the woods and also disappears off the face of the frickin' planet. And years later, hunters were walking through the woods and stumbled across a skeleton right in the area where the Chininskis used to live, which they think was Mrs. Chininski. Still haven't found Mr. Chininski yet, or so the legend goes. And those are the legends of Ong's Hat. Is it a portal to another dimension? Or did a bunch of wacky-ass people just stumble into these woods and create some cool stories? I guess you'll have to go and find out, because I'm not going to do it. Thank you for joining me in another journey into our strange reality. And try not to fall in any interdimensional portals. Or do, if you need a vacation away from other people. Bye.